All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're taking an exclusive, behind the scenes grand tour of the incredibly messy, totally fascinating origins of the modern resident embassy. If you think today's diplomatic missions are all about, quiet cocktail parties and polite handshakes, well, you are in for a wild ride. We're going back to the early modern period. This was a time when an embassy wasn't just some boring government office, it was an absolute spectacle. To really understand the sheer scale of the operation here, I want you to imagine up to 100 people traveling together. 100. That was the staggering size of British Ambassador Sir Richard Fanshaw's Spanish entourage when he traveled to the Escorial. So we're not talking about a handful of refined diplomats with briefcases. This was a massive, chaotic traveling circus of staff, family, and hangers-on, complete with literal fleets of coaches. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll look at the massive diplomatic entourages, the spies and guards, the cutthroat real estate game, the outrageous symbols of wealth, and finally, the riots and immunity rules. Section 1. Massive entourages. The household. We're kicking off with the people, because early modern embassies were essentially oversized frat houses for wealthy nobles. Take the secretary, for example, the ambassador's absolute right-hand man. Originally, the secretary wasn't a government official. They were just a privately hired servant. And because they were completely out of a job the second the ambassador went home, they were massively vulnerable to bribery. They were often tempted to just sell sensitive ciphers and state secrets to the highest bidder. Over time, governments realized this was a massive security flaw and started officially appointing them. This eventually evolved into the formal role of the chargé d'affaires, meaning the secretary would officially take command whenever the ambassador was away. Section 2. Spies and guards, unconventional roles. Now, beyond the secretaries, the embassy was absolutely packed with people playing high-stakes games of espionage. And the ultimate unsung hero of the early modern embassy, the ambassador's wife. Take Anne, Lady Fanshawe, the wife of the British ambassador in Madrid. Because early resident ambassadors usually left their wives back home, it was a huge shift when women actually started joining them abroad. Lady Fanshawe didn't just manage a massive household. She acted as a brilliant intelligence gatherer and literally stepped in as a de facto chargé d'affaires while her husband was off for months mediating treaties. These wives were incredibly effective, mainly because they could gather intelligence from places their husbands were strictly forbidden from entering. We're talking befriending queens, accessing highly private royal boudoirs, and in the case of a few daring British ambassadresses, even entering the famously restricted Ottoman harems. Plus, there was a great loophole. If a state banned an ambassador from accepting lavish gifts to, prevent bribery, the local rulers would just conveniently present those priceless gifts to his wife instead. Rule completely bypassed. For security, things were just as wild. Over in Constantinople, you had highly trained Ottoman Janissary guards hired specifically to protect embassies from street violence. But in other places, the diplomats themselves were the danger. Take the hot-headed English diplomat Sir Nicholas Throckmorton. During a joint mission in Paris in 1564, he got into such a bitter argument with his own colleague over some leaked intelligence that he accused him of being a traitor and literally drew a dagger on him, right in the embassy. Rounding out the household, you had young attachés. Think of them as the original unpaid interns. They were just young aristocrats working for free to gain foreign experience and pad their resumes. They shared the halls with chaplains, doctors, and running footmen. Now, footmen were hired for their stamina, to run messages, sure, but they were also effectively the neighborhood brawlers. They were used to physically defend the embassy from angry mobs, or even go out and get revenge on locals who dared to insult the ambassador. Section 3. The real estate game, housing the circus. So, you've got 80 to 100 people, including brawling footmen and dagger-wielding diplomats. Now you have to house them. Finding a building was a strategic nightmare, and you basically had two choices: build or rent. Building your own custom embassy was super rare and honestly really risky. Because if diplomatic relations suddenly ruptured, you just left behind a massive, incredibly expensive target for your enemies to destroy. Renting was the way to go. It was flexible and, conveniently, it allowed an ambassador, who was almost always completely out of money, to just flee their unpaid debts and landlords at a moment's notice. But finding a rental was an absolute blood sport. When Ambassador Fanshawe arrived in Madrid, he spent 3.5 months just house hunting. He finally and ruthlessly acquired the Casa de las Siete Chimeneas, the House of the Seven Chimneys. The catch? He snatched it entirely at the expense of the furious Venetian ambassador who was actually supposed to inherit the lease. The Venetian ambassador was so unbelievably outraged, he made sure the entire diplomatic corps knew his house had basically been stolen from him. And location was absolutely everything. You had to be as close to the power center as possible. Smart ambassadors in London leased properties like Durham House because it sat right between the Strand and the River Thames. This was genius. It offered really easy river transport directly to the king's palaces, and its prime location meant that local nobles passing by to attend Parliament were practically forced to stop in and visit the ambassador daily. It was unparalleled access to court gossip. Section 4. Wealth and Power. Interior Diplomacy. Once you had the mansion, you had to flex your sovereign's wealth on the inside to intimidate your hosts. The ultimate corporate perk of the era was called the Plate Collection. This was a massive, dazzling mountain of pure silver and gold-gilt household items loaned directly by the king. We're talking exotic fabrics, enormous wine cisterns, and yes, bizarrely, engraved silver chamber pots that were specifically designated for use right there in the dining room. But honestly, more than just showing off, this silver was a highly liquid insurance policy. If an ambassador fell into crippling debt, they could literally just pawn the silver to survive and pay their massive entourage. Section 5. Immunity and Riots, Legal Barriers. For our final stop, let's step outside the building and look at the invisible legal boundaries that caused absolute chaos in the city streets. We've all heard of diplomatic immunity, right? Well, early modern states pushed it to an extreme with a doctrine called franchise du quartier. Powerful nations aggressively claimed that not just the embassy building itself was untouchable, but the entire surrounding neighborhood. This outrageous rule meant whole districts of major cities like Rome and Madrid became literal no-go zones for local police. It provided guaranteed sanctuary for common criminals who just had to run into the embassy's neighborhood to escape justice, which constantly sparked violent, deadly street wars between embassy guards and local constables. And the immunity for the diplomats themselves? Ironclad. If an ambassador was caught red-handed plotting the violent overthrow of the host government, which actually happened multiple times in Elizabethan England with Spanish and French diplomats, case law established they absolutely could not be executed or tried locally. The absolute worst that could happen was that they'd be temporarily restrained, keeping their dignity perfectly intact, and then politely expelled from the country. No jail time, no execution, just a polite, "Please leave." Finally, these embassies were a massive source of tension because they brought foreign religions straight into hostile territory. In a time of fierce religious wars, a Catholic embassy in a Protestant city was a massive target. Ambassadors literally had to hide their chapels just to avoid triggering deadly riots by angry locals. At the Spanish embassy at The Hague, they completely disguised their massive chapel by building it on the first floor directly above the stables. They had to make sure absolutely no crosses or stained glass were visible from the street. Otherwise, a local mob might literally burn the place down. So as we wrap up our grand tour today, it really leaves you wondering. We've seen the brawling footmen, the stolen real estate, the dining room chamber pots, and these completely untouchable criminal sanctuaries. The next time you see a modern news story about a diplomatic immunity scandal or an embassy standoff, ask yourself just how much of that chaotic, untouchable 17th century DNA is still baked into our global system today. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the history behind the headlines.